Webinar is on using presets, setups, and hot folders to help to automate your workflow a bit. I'm going to hide this now. My colleague Jasper will be monitoring the chat while I'm presenting. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. We probably won't address them immediately, but we will have a Q&A session at the end where we will cover any questions that you have as well. So first of all, we're going to define some of the terms and concepts, try and explain them a bit more so everybody is on the same page for when we start. So we're going to look at setups in Production Manager, default job properties, and applying the properties to a preset. Then we're going to proceed with creating and assigning presets, and we'll use some examples just to demonstrate how presets work and how you can use them. And then we're going to proceed to the setup properties where we will look at the hot folders, the automatic nesting, and automation of the workflow. Finally, we will end with a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, we'll address them in the Q&A. Okay. So this is a completely, that's not good. It's a completely fresh installation. So it's, we're going to begin from stage 1, and then we're going to proceed covering the topics that we were discussing. Okay, so as I was explaining, this is a completely fresh installation. So we're just going to add an example printer here. It's one we have in the showroom. We're going to add the Roland VG640. And for this example, we're not going to connect to the printer. We'll just output to a file port, just so we can use it for demonstration purposes. Okay, first of all, we're going to look at defining terms. And the first thing we're going to look at is setups. So for each printer, I can have multiple setups. Each setup is kind of like an individual queue for your printer, to which you can assign different properties. So you don't have to choose the properties for your job every single time. So if I have my printer selected, on the left-hand side of my screen, I have the option to duplicate my setup. And when I click this option, it's going to pop up with the box to add the setup. This is effectively another queue for the same printer. I can call this by a different name. So in this example, we're going to be using some different applications to demonstrate our preset and our hot folder and our workflow. So we're going to call this new setup banners. And this is going to be a queue that we use for our banner material. Okay, when I add my setup, it's going to automatically pop up the default job properties window. And the reason for this is that I can assign different default properties to each setup. So if I want to, I can add another duplicate setup. So for this example, we might use canvas. This is going to be the setup where I add all of my canvas jobs. Again, it's going to pop up the default job properties because I can have different default properties for my canvas queue and for my banner queue. Okay, we're going to have a little look now at the default job properties. We'll have a look at some of the properties that we can assign, and then we'll proceed from there. So for each setup, I can select a different set of default job properties, like so, by using the down arrow to the right-hand side of my setup. So for my default queue, let's open up the window and see the kind of thing that we can set up. So some basic examples would be setting up something like your media width. So let's say we have 137 centimeter vinyl. We can set that up in my default properties. We might want our job always centered to the media. We can do that very easily here as well. But this also extends as far as using different ICC profiles. For example, we're going to use this setup to demonstrate making a preset for some vinyl jobs, some simple stickers, for example. So I'm going to select my ICC profile for my 3M IJ180C. You can also assign different labels and marks by default. So we might want to have some crop marks. This is going to be quite a simple example, so we're just going to stick with this. We're going to save the property. And when you save your properties, you can select the tabs you want to save. If you don't select a tab, it's going to just use the defaults for the printer. So for example, we made a change to our layout tab. So we want this checked. We made a tab to our color management tab. So we want this checked. However, we didn't make adjustments to the other tabs. So we can just uncheck these options. And we can choose a name for our preset. So we can call it 3M IJ180C, for example. And then I can apply this and select OK. And we will see if I add like so to this queue, it's automatically using my 3M IJ180C preset. So we see that it's centered to the media. It has my output profile for 3M IJ180C, and it's using the crop marks that I selected. So this is a very simple example of some of the settings you can apply to a different queue. So here we might go to the setup properties and actually rename our original setup to 3M IJ180C as well. So we can use it as a reference point. This is one way you can arrange and organize your production manager so your jobs are applied to the correct queue and you don't have to choose your preset every single time. So if we see with the canvas queue, if I add a job to the canvas queue, it's just going to be held in the queue. Probably it will use my default properties, which are none at the moment. So this is how you can queue. It's how you can send jobs to different queues. Again, if you want to see every job, you can just select the All tab, and it's going to show every job for every setup. You can even choose when you add the job, which setup you want the job to be added to. By default, if you have a setup selected, that will be the setup that it chooses, but it is still possible to add jobs to another setup for that interface as well. And we see it is in my 3M queue, and it is using my 3M preset. So that is the basic concepts of using setups and presets to assign different properties. As you can imagine, if you have lots of different media types and lots of different applications, it's a very handy way to organize your production manager. And we'll see if I add another printer as an example. So let's say we have a HP latex printer. A lot of drivers. So we have the latex 360 just here. We'll add this one for the file port as well. This one has a completely different set of presets and setups. So if I have different printers, I don't have to use the same setup. Each printer has its own queue of setups. Okay. So let's have a little look at how we can practically use this and some of the settings that we can apply. Let's take the example of our banner preset. So I'm just going to add in a job here that I've already prepared. These are just some very simple designs, 1.5 by 3 meters. There we go. So I want to set up some properties for my banner that I can use for every single job. So all of the banners that I print from this queue are going to be the same size as this. So first of all, I'm just going to go to the properties and I'm going to define that just so I remember exactly which jobs I need to add to this queue. So here we are. We've renamed this for 1.5 by 3 meter banners. So we know the properties are going to be correct for our job. Again, I'm just going to center my job here. I'm going to choose a different ICC profile, for example. And then I'm also going to come to the Finishing Tools tab, and I'm going to apply some grommets to my banner. So let's increase the size of these a bit and make them solid, just so we can see them very easily. So the grommets are basically guidelines for where I'm going to punch the grommet holes when my banner is complete. We won't go into too much detail about how this works. There are guides for it on our YouTube channel, but it's very easy to increase the number and the layout of my grommets like so. I'm also going to link them together and just increase the offset slightly to 4 centimeters into my banner. And then I'm going to save this preset as we demonstrated before. So we need our layout tab, color management tab, and also our finishing tools tab selected. So I'm going to select OK, and then I'm going to save this as banner 1.5 times 3 meters with grommets. Oh, I can't use the dots. Banner 150 by 300 centimeter grommets. Okay. And as we'll see, if I add in a couple of other examples, make sure that it's coming to the correct setup and it's using the correct properties. You can choose a different preset when you import it here, but if we leave it on the default properties, it's going to use the defaults assigned to my queue. Which I might not have actually applied. Hang on, let me see. Properties. Okay, so we didn't apply the preset to our default job properties. So let's do that quickly. Okay, so again, just to demonstrate that, I select my preset. I go to my arrow on the right-hand side and I select default job properties. Then all of the presets for my different setups for my printer will be in this list. So I select the correct preset, I apply it, and I select OK. And then if I load in the same jobs, now we can use the default properties because we've applied those as default properties. And when these files load in, they're pretty big. Interesting. Default job properties. Okay. Let's just check that we've defined everything correctly here. Grommets, yes. Okay. So we have to apply this. And I add in my files using the default job properties for my presets. Something wrong here, I think. Okay, there we are. So now it's applying the correct preset by default to my jobs. So as we see, the grommets have been applied, the job is centered, and if we check the color management tab, it's using our banner preset. Another example we can use from the Finishing Tools tab is the Finishing Tools for canvases. So we're going to add another job, but this time from our canvas files. So my nice snowy village. I'm going to center this one again. I'm going to use canvas ICC profile, but in the Finishing Tools this time, we're going to use a mirrored bleed instead, like so. We'll have our corners here as well, and this is how we want our canvas to print. Now we're going to go to our default job properties. Oh, sorry. Now we're going to save our preset. So again, Finishing Tool tab, Color Management tab, Layout tab, anything else we want to change. Save it as canvas. Okay. And then in our default properties, we select our canvas preset and we apply it like so. Now, any other jobs that we add into our canvas queue, hang on 1 second. Okay, I didn't save the Finishing Tool tab, like a very clever person. And now again, we're just going to check that it's still using the canvas preset, and we check that it's got our finishing tools. Now we add our job again into the queue. And it's got our mirrored bleed and our ICC profile automatically applied. So these are the example presets that we're going to use during this demonstration. Okay, so now let's delve a little bit into the properties for the setup and how we can set up our hot folders and begin to automate our workflow. So for each setup, I can set different properties for that setup as well. So if I, again, come to my down arrow and come to setup properties, as well as the name, we can set up an individual hot folder and also some other properties such as automatically rotating images to fit the media when they're loaded in, and even an option to automatically start jobs when they are added to the queue. Now in the second tab of the setup properties, we have an option for automatic job nesting. This is a very handy tool as well if our jobs aren't going to be bigger than our media size. So we can use this to decide how many jobs are going to be sent at the same time. So for example, if all my canvases are the same size, I can tell it to nest 2 jobs together, like so, and then it's going to automatically send them. So I'm going to apply this, and then we'll add 2 jobs and we'll take a look at what happens. But first of all, I'm just going to select the drop-down arrow and uncheck the Make Active button. So it will rip my job, it will put it in the output queue, but it won't actually send it through to the printer. This is quite a handy thing you can do to turn on and off different queues. For example, if I want to load jobs into my banner queue, but I don't want them to print, however, I would like to rip them for later on, I can uncheck the Make Active button. It's still going to add the jobs, apply the properties, rip them, but it will hold them in the output queue until we make it active again. Okay, so we're going to add a couple jobs into the queue here, like so. As we see, as per my settings, it has automatically nested my jobs. If I open them up, we see that it has applied the preset that we selected for this queue as well. So they're ready to just send through to the output queue. Now, in the setup property queue, as we showed earlier, you can also set a hot folder. This is a folder for which the setup will automatically pull jobs into the hold queue. So if I want to simply copy jobs
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. So as I was showing in the setup properties, you can assign a different hot folder, which is a folder from which the queue will pull jobs for each different setup. So we're going to show just quickly how we can make a hot folder and how we can put jobs automatically into the queue. So if I open up my file map and I go, for example, to my documents, my actual documents, I'm just going to make some sample folders and demonstrate how the hot folders work with the software. So I'm going to call the folder hot folders, and inside this folder I'm going to create 3 further folders, one for each of my queues. So this is going to be for my 3M IJ 180C. I add another folder. My poor computer. This one's going to be for Canvas. Add another folder. So this is the location of my hot folders. So I'm going to come back into Production Manager, and I'm going to come to the setup properties for my 3M media. And I'm going to browse for my hot folders quickly. I'm going to select my 3M hot folder. OK. Apply it. And it's loading in the files. So I'll select OK. For my Canvas setup properties, we see the hot folder is different. So I can set up individual hot folders for each queue. Documents, hot folders, Canvas. Apply. It's copying in the files again. And my banners. Again, different setup properties, different hot folder. We will select from our documents and from our hot folders, the banner hot folder, like that. We're going to leave this one on after receive as hold for an example, and show you what happens when we paste some files into here. So I'm going to come back to where my banners are stored. I'm going to select my banners, and I'm just going to copy and paste them.
The sound and video transmission hangs over and over again. Now it's okay. If you're like
now it's okay. Yeah. I think it's my computer. Yeah. It's all right. So now we see the files that we copied and pasted into the banner hot folder have been automatically picked up by Production Manager. So we're just going to say to our Canvas queue to hold the jobs. So we can demonstrate this one as well. So if I come back to my documents, actually we'll get some files first. So desktop, this is the folder where my Canvas jobs are stored. We're going to select these and copy them and paste them into our Canvas folder. Come back to Production Manager. We see it's nesting the jobs in sets of 2, like we selected, and it's automatically applied my settings for my jobs, like so. Now, something interesting, which is where the automation comes in, is in the setup properties, you can tell it to automatically start jobs when it receives them. And when it starts can be limited by the automatic nesting. So at the moment, if it's set to auto start, if I add a job, it's just going to send it directly to my printer. So if my setup is active and I paste something into the hot folder, it's going to load it in automatically, apply my default job properties automatically, and send it to the printer automatically. So this is where the hot folders can really help you with automation. But if we want to limit when it sends a job or how it decides when to send a job, we can do this in the automatic nesting tab. So if my automatic nesting is set to 2 jobs, and I then paste one more job into the folder, it's just going to hold and it's not going to nest because I have set my setup properties to only send when there are 2 jobs nested together. And the reason for this is because otherwise I'm wasting a lot of expensive media if I send just one job on its own like this. So what I really want is 2 jobs nested together to send at the same time. So I'm just going to check an option. Oh, that's okay. But we'll see if I copy and paste another file into the hot folder, it has automatically nested my jobs. It's marked them as ready to send, and it's going to automatically process them through the RIP engine without me having to press a single button. Okay, so we're just going to recap quickly on the setup properties. So once I've set my hot folder, I come back to the setup properties. I set my after receive to automatically start, or I can leave it on hold and come to the second tab of setup properties, which is for automatic nesting. If I have the automatic nesting option checked, it's going to nest and send my job based on one of these parameters. So in this example, see, we have to select one criteria. In this example, I have selected number of jobs as 2 because I know the size of my canvases and I know that it fits my media well. So in this case, when I add 2 jobs to the queue or the hot folder, as you saw, it nested the jobs, it applied my properties, and then it sent them. You can also select it by an amount of time if you prefer, or as a percentage coverage of the media. This can be very useful if you want to send after a specific amount of media is covered. So in this example, I would say I want to send after 50% of my media is covered. And then in my default properties, I can change the length of my media, for example, to 2 meters. And then after my print exceeds 1 meter, which is 50% of the length of my media, it is going to automatically send the job. It's not ideal. You can't set it to determine this by square meterage, for example. But this is the way I would recommend to do it if you're using jobs of different sizes. In this case, it's going to nest my jobs until it covers more than 50% of my media, and then it's going to send them. Again, as the setup properties are different for each setup, this is only going to apply to my canvas presets. So with my banners, for example, they're not going to nest because I only have room for one banner on my media width. So I would just tell it to automatically start when I load jobs into the queue. So in this case, I'm not going to do it because it will probably crash my computer again. When I load in one of the banners, it's going to load it, apply the properties, and then automatically rip and output it. With my canvas, because my jobs are both the same size, roughly 50 by 35 centimeters, I set in my setup properties to nest 2 jobs and then start. Again, if you have multiple criteria, it's going to send the job when it hits the first. So for example, if we have percentage coverage and number of jobs checked, it's going to send it when it reaches 2 jobs, even if it doesn't cover more than 50% of the media. So yeah, that's the kind of core concept and ideas behind setting your hot folders and using the automatic job nesting to automatically send files. This is possible even if you don't want to use the hot folder. If I just add jobs to my queue, when it receives 2 jobs, it's going to nest them, apply my default properties, and then send them to my printer as well. Okay, so that is the core content I wanted to cover in this webinar. We'll move on now to some Q&A. So if there are any questions or anything that people want recovered or clarified, please feel free to post them in the chat, and then we'll handle those as soon as possible. Jasper, was there anything you noted while we were presenting? No? Yes, the automatic, everything that you have in the setup properties and the default properties is individual to each queue. So, for example, if I have my automatic nesting set to 5 jobs here, and I apply it, it's only going to apply for my canvas setup. So if I go to the setup properties for my 3M media, I come to the second tab, the automatic job nesting is not checked. So it's not going to automatically send my jobs. And if I come to my banner, it's set to auto start, whereas the others aren't. However, it won't do any job nesting either. Again, if the rotation of your image is important, you can uncheck the rotate image to fit media option, and it will keep it in the original rotation as well. Okay, are there any further questions on the software or the content we covered? Okay. So if there are any further inquiries, these are some places where you can get some information or some assistance with using the software. So for technical questions, you can mail support@thinksai.eu for the Europe, Middle East, Asia, and Oceania. For any commercial or general inquiries, info@thinksai.eu can be used as well. We have a YouTube channel, which is populated with a lot of videos about SAI. If you search SA International, into YouTube, will pop up there and you can have a look. Or it's the SAI channel. We also have a live chat on our website, which I already have loaded up here, actually, I think. So when you come to thinksai.com, in the bottom left, there's an online chat. You can just enter your email address here and your name. You start the chat and you can talk with one of our support colleagues who will pass you to the correct place. Okay, so thank you very much for everyone who attended the webinar, and we hope to hear from you soon.